Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears, and today's episode 15, which is called The Swineherd. But I've renamed it to Beauty is More Than Just Lipstick on a Pig. Let's begin. We're going to start off with a summary as usual, where I'll highlight some of the most important points. Then we'll go on to my critical review, which I'll use sentences to frame some of my opinions. And last but not least, we'll look at the trigger points, the points that I found triggering in the fairy tale myself. Okay, let's begin. Beauty is more than just lipstick on a pig. Once upon a time, a poor prince lived with the intention of getting married one day. He owned a kingdom that wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him and his chosen one. After thinking about it, he decided to marry the emperor's daughter. I digress, people. Notice how men have the power of choice in most fairy tales, and women have to wait to be chosen. He gave her two gifts. The first one was a rose that had a beautiful smell. It only grew every fifth year on his father's grave, and its scent was so strong that it could make people forget their problems and miseries. The other gift was a nightingale who had a beautiful voice. The gifts were sent to the princess in silver cases. When they came to the castle, the emperor ordered for the cases to be brought to him in his chamber where the princess was playing around. When she saw the cases, she clapped her hands. I digress. I can imagine she was delighted with the elaborate silver cases. She saw the rose and everyone gasped because of its beauty. The princess came closer to the cases and yelled to her father that it was a real rose. Everyone gasped even more because not only was the rose beautiful and had a beautiful scent, it wasn't artificial either. I digress. The prince's act of sincerity is overwhelming. The emperor wanted to check the gift in the other case, and when he opened it, a little nightingale came out and started singing. He was amazed. One night was reminded of a music box the late empress used to own, and it brought the emperor to tears. I digress. The princess isn't good enough for this genuine man. The princess wanted to know if it was a real bird. Everyone told her it wasn't, but she didn't want to let the prince into the castle and decided to let the bird go. The prince wasn't ready to give up yet. He smeared black and brown paint across his face, put a hat on his head, and went knocking on the emperor's doors. He was a resourceful young man, and when he saw the emperor, he asked him if there was anything he could do in his kingdom. I digress. Resourcefulness is a rare quality to possess. The emperor told him that everyone was looking for a job those days, but the right but that right now he only needed somebody to look after his pigs. So the prince became the swineherd. I digress. The prince isn't afraid to do a job beneath his title just to be close to his loved one. He was placed in a small room near the pigsty and it became his new home. He started working right away so that everyone could see the pot he made. There were bells around the pot, so every time someone would cook something, in it, the bells would ring. The real magic of the pot uh, was in its steam. Anyone who placed his finger in the steam would immediately know what's cooking. Where in the kingdom? I digress. He's a talented man that knows his worth. The prince went for a walk with her. The princess went for a walk with her servants, and then she heard the music coming from the pot, and she was all happy because she could play it too. She told her servants to check the price of the instrument from the swineherd. One of them went to the swineherd in her wooden shoes and asked for the price. The resourceful prince told her immediately that he wanted 10 kisses in exchange for the pot. I digress. I feel the prince is emotionally manipulative with this princess by trading sweet, tender moments in order to have her fall in love with him. The servant was caught off guard, and the swineherd didn't want to settle for less. She went back to the princess to tell her what the price was. Since she didn't want to say it out loud, she whispered it in her ear. The princess said the swineherd was very rude. She was angry and headed to her castle, where she once more heard the music. She thought everyone through and she thought everything through and told her servant to go and check it if it's the swineherd would take the servant's kisses in exchange for the pot. He told her it was out of the question. He only wanted the princess's kisses. She agreed, but didn't want anyone to see them kissing. I digress. But of course, to kiss someone like the swineherd would be beneath her. The servants stood in a circle and spread their dresses so that no one would see the princess kissing the swineherd. Now they knew what someone was cooking. I digress again. He was cooking up or conjuring up a plan to capture his loved one's heart, where they could find something sweet to eat and so on. They were happy because they found the pot to be interesting and amusing. The princess told them they can't say anything to anyone because she is the emperor's daughter. She promised to be silent about everything. The days went by, and the prince couldn't allow the time to pass by without him taking action. One One day went by, and one day, he made a little rattle and played the waltz and other dances when someone would shake it while the princess was walking by his room. She heard magnificent melodies. I digress. This prince was seducing the princess and took part in the whole game. She sent one of her servants to ask him about the price of the rattle and mentioned that she wouldn't be paying with kisses again. This time, he didn't demand 10 kisses, he demanded hundreds of them. The emperor watched it all from his balcony, and he wanted to know why there were so many people in front of the swineherd's room. He put on his shoes and went down to see what was going on. He heard the servants counting something, and when he came to the room, he stood on his finger to see what was going on. The servants were counting the kisses and didn't even notice him. When the emperor saw his daughter kissing the swineherd, he banished both of them, and the swineherd received exactly 86 kisses. I digress. Surely the king knew the swineherd was infatuated with his daughter. As resourceful as he is, the princess couldn't stop yelling and crying. She could have picked the prince to marry her, but she rejected him. I digress. With all those kisses, she refused to pick the swineherd. The swineherd thought it was a great opportunity to wash his face and wear his real clothes. When the princess saw him, she even bowed. The prince told him that he only felt hatred for her because, first, she didn't want an honest man for her husband, and second, she didn't like his gifts that were beautiful, but she was prepared to kiss his swineherd for a bunch of toys. I digress. Was the swineherd truly being an honest person by trying to manipulate her through presents? He thought she deserved to be alone. I digress. Maybe as a young girl turning into a woman, she wants to become an independent person with a mind of her own. The prince went to his kingdom and she was left alone, grieving with the only melody she knew how to play. What an interesting story. At first, it seemed like the swineherd, the prince, was so innocent and so pure, and yet, and so resourceful. And then halfway through the story, you realize how manipulative he is. He's basically trying to buy her over with presents and lavish things. Mind you, very clever. He's a very, very resourceful person, which should not be underestimated, as poor as he was. Let's take a look at my critical review and how it plays in society today. This is an interesting story that opened up many different themes as the story unfolded. First, the story is about a poor prince who didn't have any real dowry or money that could measure as wealth, but had a wealth of resourceful skills that opened up a tremendous possibility that could illustrate his potential as a human being. But upon reflection, this story takes on the theme of manipulation of one's affections through gifts as a sign of love. Now, in most unions, partnerships, etc., the token of love has been recognized through gift giving as opposed to demonstrations of love, which I must admit is hard. So let's take a look at some of the sentences that I used to frame this review. Number one, after thinking about it, he decided to marry the emperor's daughter. I digress. Notice how men have the power of choice in most fairy tales, a reality that comes to mind in the late 20th century. Elizabeth Taylor was gifted a whopping 30-carat diamond necklace by her then husband, Richard Burton, whom she divorced twice in spite of all the riches he showered her with. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, they met on the film called Cleopatra, and he played Mark Antony. So um, it was a very popular film. I mean, it wasn't fantastic or anything. It was really popular because the two of them met on that screen and apparently fell in love. Oddly enough, Richard wasn't her true soul love, though. However, it was a codependent relationship that left both partners heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol. The man that stole her heart was someone called Michael Todd. He was also in the industry, but he was like a producer, a businessman who tragically died in a plane crash not long after their marriage, which was a lavish ceremony. The year-long marriage devastated her when it came to an end. However, she went on to win an Oscar as Best Actress in the film Butterfield 8. The gifts mean, meant so much to Elizabeth, but it was the love she shared between her and Michael that could never be replaced. The line that caught my attention is after thinking about it, he decided to marry the emperor's daughter. He didn't even know her name. It's almost like she was an ornament to make him look good and to expand his kingdom. I can understand that with all the tender, loving kisses he bestowed upon her, she still rejected him. This was more about him reaching a goal like a business, and the princess knew it too. He wasn't really being honest at all. Well, not the way he tried to make it seem. He chose her because he had the power of choice, but she rejected him because had the power she had the power to not be used as an object of someone's being a sugar daddy. Because let's face it, that's what he was. He was a sugar daddy to her. And she chose not to allow him to use her and be her sugar daddy. Good for her. The next part, number 2. When the emperor saw his daughter kissing the swineherd, he banished them both, and the swineherd received exactly 86 kisses. I digress. Surely the king knew the swineherd was infatuated with his daughter. This sentence reminds me of the great English comedy, East is East. Now, East is a great, great English comedy, and it really talks about the um, the problems that people have in society when they come as immigrants to another country. Yes, the problems they inhabit when they come to another country as immigrants, because a lot of people, and you see it so much in England, especially in London, you have the the Muslim area over there with the Pakistans and people from the Muslim community. Then you have the Saudi Arabians, and you have the Europeans, and you have the Australians and the Kiwis, the New Zealanders. They're all in their different fractions, very similar to, I would say, in New York, because they want to move to England or they want to move to London for the financial or economic opportunities, but they do not want to embrace the culture or the lifestyle. They want to continue with their own culture and lifestyle. So this is a really good film. Now, I'm just going to share this with you. In 1971, George Khan is a Pakistani Muslim who has lived in Britain since 1937. He has a wife in Pakistan. He and his second wife, Ella, a British Roman Catholic woman of Irish descent, whom he beat. Okay, like to let you know, he beat her and abused her horribly. Because in some ways, not in every way, in the Muslim religion, it's very machisto. It's very macho. I have been married for 25 years and have 7 children. Nazir, Abdul, Tariq, Mania, Salim, Mania, and Sahid. George and Ella run a popular fish and chip shop. Okay. While George is obsessed with the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, primarily out of concern for his first family living near the conflict zone, and arranging marriages for his children, the children themselves born and brought up in Britain. This is what I told you from the very beginning about this film. They want to live in England, but they still want to remain with the same traditions and the same culture. They don't want to adapt. Themselves born and brought up in Britain increasingly see themselves as British and reject Pakistani dress, food, religion, and culture. After George disowns Nazir for running out on his arranged marriage, he immediately begins making plans to have another of his children married to maintain his image. It's all about his image. It's all about his ego. It's all about his offspring. Look at my children, and they are a reflection of who I am. It focuses on, the film doesn't delve into other arranged marriages he sets up for his other sons just to maintain face. It focuses on the stigma of his homosexual son in a Muslim Catholic family. The first scene starts with his this arranged marriage and the opening ceremony where you see he lifts up the veil only to see this stunningly beautiful woman. He is shocked, but he has to be honest with himself. Unlike the prince, who wasn't as honest as he was made to believe. In a way, that's different from the prince. So he runs out of the hall where the marriage is to take place. And at the end of the film, and in real life, the son is disowned a little bit like the princess. The mother and the brothers respect him, though, even though they realize he is homosexual. The sad truth is this story, it looks at the difficulty of a mixed race and religious family being raised in a more Anglo-Saxon society. Certain traditions and lifestyles are not compatible with the origins of one's parents. And herein lies a conflict between ego, tradition, and image, not necessarily love at all. Here's a man, and he must have a wife and an offspring to look successful in the eyes of society, just like the prince. So, here is my question to you. Is society's approval more important than your approval and peace of mind? If the answer is yes to the first part, then I guess you're a slave to society, which is a shame, really, isn't it? Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think Mr. Khan or George Khan must have known that there's no way that his children would comply to being raised like people from Pakistan, as Pakistan is. They were born and raised in England. They were born and raised in London. They had, for goodness sake, they didn't even have a Pakistani shop. They had a fish and chip shop, which used to be England's national dish, most famous national dish. Now it's Indian food, ironically. He must have known this, but in spite of knowing this, I think deep down in the back of his mind, he knew this, but he wanted to have his own way. In spite of what his children were going through. I really admire his homosexual son that looked at this woman and said, I can't marry you, basically. And he ran out. He was amazed at her beauty, but he couldn't marry her because he had to be honest to himself. And he respected the woman enough to say, I have to be honest to you too. You do not deserve this. So good for him. So this was the second one. And the last one, I digress. Was the swineherd truly being an honest person by trying to manipulate her through presents? Now, I find myself thinking about the British royal family, but I think it can go for a lot of royal families. The royal family and the princesses have a royal career independent of royal duties. This is true. A lot of them, um, Princess Anne had it, and a lot of the princesses decided that they just didn't want to be uh, pieces of jewelry that the prince had on his arm as a piece of decoration. Princess Anne, Lady Diana Spencer, Sarah Ferguson, these women have broken the glass ceiling in terms of just someone being able to produce an heir and a spare in the royal family. Some of these women were manipulated into thinking their husbands really loved them by presenting them with a royal title. You're now a princess. So this means that you automatically receive this love, which is unfortunate because Princess Anne, when she was married to Mark Phillips, she was made to believe that Mark Phillips truly loved her. He turned out to be a total narcissist. He didn't love anybody. He just wanted to marry somebody that was good on horses, and she was, and that was her career. She was an equestrian rider, and she was an excellent horsewoman. But he basically he chose her. She decided to marry him because she was in love with him, but he chose her to make himself look better and make himself look good. And Princess Anne decided, she says, oh no, I don't want this. I don't want this narcissist in my life. And she divorced him and got married to a finer man. Good for Princess Anne. Well, you have Princess Diana, who it was very clear that they wanted her to just be a decorative object. Well, she sure showed the royal family that she had brains too. She had brains and she also had emotional complications, but she did have brains. She was a very smart woman, very cultured, very talented, and loaded with soft skills. And she turned that into a power for herself and also turned it into a career while still being an excellent mother, some people would say. And some people would say she was a bit too clingy and dependent, especially on William. But she turned her life into a great, flourishing career as a businesswoman in her own right, with her many charities and, working for certain humanitarian causes, which was different from what they thought she should do in the royal family, standing in her own power, trying to be a whole person in her own right, because she was married to somebody like is King Charles, who was basically a broken man. And when you hear the interview, when when they first get engaged to get married, and they say, "Well, of course you're in love," and he says, "Whatever that means." If he didn't really know what love was, and I think even today, he still doesn't know what it really is. But that's a tricky one, though. That's definitely a tricky one to know. I've always said it, unless you love yourself, truly learn how to love yourself, it's very hard to love somebody else. Then we have Sarah Ferguson, who just recently went through, I think, a mastectomy. She had cancer. And she left the royal family quite earlier on. She was very independent herself, but she decided to work on children's books. She wanted to have her own career. And of course, her two children also have. Eugenie and Beatrice, they also have their own career. Now, what was considered unpopular 30 years ago for these princesses to have their own career is now considered something very important and very admired. So that's the third one. Now let's take a look at the trick points. Well, there are a couple of things that I found very triggering for me in this particular story. So the first trigger, standing steadfast to the power of choice, not depending on a partner to make me whole. Now I get the feeling in this story, when she's like, on the ground crying and sobbing, that she feels as though not only did she reject the prince, he rejected her too. But I think she felt like, well, what's going to happen now? Who am I now? And I think this was an important point for her in the story. Who am I now? Who am I without this person? Who am I without the prince? A very interesting question. And I think it's really important for women to stand in their own power with whether they have a partner or not, male or female. It depends on what your preference is. Love is love anyway. Not having to wait to be rescued. This is, a lot of these fairy tales are all about, a prince rescuing the princess, you know, getting married and becoming one. You complete me type of thing. A bit like in Jerry Maguire when Tom Cruise's character goes to see Renée Zellweger's character, and he says, "I'm so sorry, I abandoned you. I realized that without you, I'm nothing. You complete me." And then she says, "Yes, you complete me too." I think that's incorrect. I think as an individual that we should be whole individuals, not like a broken person until we meet someone. We meet that man or we meet that woman, I guess, and we become whole. Love makes us whole. Yes, but love does make you whole and will make you whole. But you don't need to have a love of another person to make you whole. The most important love is to have the love of yourself that makes you whole. When I started to realize that just in small little increments, that feeling of self like and then move into a little bit of self love, I felt like a brand new person. It felt like it's not that I didn't need people so much, but I didn't need to depend on their approval and their opinion of me in order for me to feel whole. And I did not need to have a man standing by me, offering me a ring, offering me marriage, rescuing me. I can rescue myself, thank you very much. Oddly enough, I've had to do it all my life. And I didn't even realize it because I was one of those people that I felt like the dog sitting in the shop window waiting for somebody to choose me. And now I realize, first of all, first and foremost, I choose myself. And then I have the power of choice. I can choose whoever I want. But at the same time, I'm also, I believe, quite protected by God and by spirit. So I think God will and spirit will interrupt if somebody that's coming towards me is not the right person. They'll either remove them out of my life or bring somebody that is right for my life in. But I believe that when you get into relationship, two uh, the two halves that come together are whole. I am whole, he's whole. And then we create a whole, a new relationship from two whole people, not two broken people. The next one, I have met so many religious women that have got married within their religion. Oh, yes, this is another one that really bothers me. It really triggered me. You know, I have to get married. Oh, my goodness, when I was in Spain, one of the first things somebody asked me, and it was a German woman, who's married to a Canadian man, actually. She said, don't you feel rejected, bad, being single and not being married? And I said, no, I don't really. I think I must have, to be quite honest. I don't think I was being as honest as I would have liked to have been. I think there was shreds of and traces of insecurity under the surface. But I said no because you know, I guess I thought that was better thing to say, or the best thing to say. But I realized I must have felt it, not because I really felt it, but it was, well, there's something wrong with you in society. It was the society's influence and the impression. Oh, well, there's something wrong with you, so there must be something wrong with me. That's what I was really feeling. But I wasn't feeling bad because I'm single. And I said, I met so many religious women that have got married within their religion just to prove they are worthy and to avoid the label of being gay, as if to say being single and being an independent woman or man means that you're gay. I think it's absolutely ridiculous myself. But this is some of the impressions. A wallflower, unlovable, as if to say a person's love outside of yourself is the ultimate blessing of all. It's not. Self-love is. I've met, I remember when I used to practice Buddhism, I met so many Anglo-Saxon women that got married to Japanese men within the organization. And to be quite honest, I don't think they even really loved them. But they got married because it looked good, it looked politically correct, and on and on and on. I mean, some of them may have really truly loved them, but on a whole, I don't think so. I really, really don't think so. And forgive me if I seem a bit judgmental. I don't mean to be, but I get the feeling that they did it just to conform to the organization, as opposed to being committed to the spiritual aspects of the actual religion. That's what I feel. So again, I think it's really important that it's important to be whole and to not walk around feeling as though you have to do what everybody else tells you to do in order to fit in and to feel loved. There's so many people that have been married and to rich men, have all the presents in the world, have all the luxury in the world, all the things that the prince was willing to give this woman, toys, gifts, whatever. And yet these women, if you ask them honestly, do, do you love him? Did you love him? A lot of them, not all, a lot of them would say no. And I can guarantee Princess Grace of Monaco, Grace Kelly, knowing her husband was completely unfaithful to her. He had so many women. She was not a happy woman. She really wasn't. She upheld a good persona, but she was not happy. And the last one here, I'm reminded of, we're talking about Muslims and the Muslim type situation. Charlie Hebdo, Muslims, the fairy tale, the myth of living happily ever after. If this is true, it's hard work. Now, let me just say something about Charlie Hebdo and Muslims, and maybe the fairy tale and the myth of living happily ever after. Now, Charlie Hebdo was a cartoonist, a French cartoonist that unfortunately, was gunned down by a bunch of people from Issa, the highly toxic terrorist group, the Muslims. And Charlie Hebdo and his cartoonists, would make fun and say not such politically correct things about Muslims, and also paint a broad brush and paint all Muslims as the same. It's not the same. It's the same with all Catholics being the same or all Christians being the same. We're not the same. There are some that are very extreme, and you go, oh my God, another extreme Catholic, another extreme evangelical Christian, please. Another extreme Jewish person, please. But the remainder of the people that are just really devoted to their spirituality and their religion and the self-respect that being committed to this religion, their own religion, is so important to them. The self-respect, the self-esteem that they get through having that spiritual content and context, that's what's important. But you do get the ones that are really, really toxic. And unfortunately, he was gunned down. But what was interesting is out of that situation, you had a Muslim man. Now, this is after they painted a broad brush about all Muslims being this way. You had this one black Muslim man that was working in a Jewish bakery in Paris. And Issas captured them and held the Jewish people hostage. And he told them, he said, these people are very good to me. I work in this place. They've done nothing wrong. Please release them. And they did release them. He was supposed to be honored by the French and be given his citizenship and just be given not a title, but to be really honored and dignified, pardon me, by the French. That didn't happen, but it just goes to show you the opposite. You have one person trying to paint a broad brush and the other person showing you that I am light too. I'm a Muslim, but I'm light. And I have respect for my religion. I have respect for my spirituality, but I'm not toxic. Humphrey Bogart, he is he was a gangster actor, but a very wise man. Humphrey Bogart said when he was alive, you must always keep a marriage fresh. Never let it get stale like bread. And there are a lot of people that get married, and after they get married, they put on weight, they stop exercising. They're so grateful that they had this man or they had this woman, and they forget about the relationship and about the seduction, about the relationship and developing the relationship. And I think what's more important, whether you get married or not, always keep it fresh. Never let a relationship go stale. Always keep it fresh. And I think one of the things that I will say about the prince, even though he gave her as many presents as he could possibly find, is that he always found different ways to keep her engaged, even though she didn't love him. Maybe she could have loved him. You know, sometimes it's not always the person that you're madly in love with that you end up marrying, but it's the person that you, pardon me, you develop a friendship with and a love, a gradual love through your partnership that you end up staying with. So that's my those are my triggers. This is the today's episode. It's completed, and I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your views. Thank you for dropping in. And I just want to end with healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and a gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong gift, blessing, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Please don't hesitate to subscribe. I'd love for you to subscribe. Leave a comment as long as it's, even if it's negative, at least as though, at least if it's constructive, that's good. And give me a good thumbs up and a like because it helps with the algorithms. Okay, take care, goodbye, and have a great weekend.